Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Cipher Brief Digital Studio. I'm editor-writer Ethan Masukal. Today, we're going to be talking about critical minerals and how China's dominance of this sector poses national security risks, including to U.S. military supply chains. To speak with me about this today is Dak Hardwick. He is the Vice President for International Affairs at the Aerospace Industries Association. So Dak brings good expertise and insights into how the U.S. aerospace and defense industry deal with issues such as defense and commercial trade and supply chain security. So Dak, thank you so much for joining us.
Ethan, it's great to be with you today. Thank you so much for having me on.
Dak, just to level set, can you give us a picture of the risk and exposure that we have to China's dominance in the critical minerals sector, specifically national security and military supply chains?
Sure, Ethan, let me start with from the aerospace and defense perspective, there is not one thing that we use in the industry that doesn't have some type of critical mineral or rare earth element. It's essential to the aerospace and defense industry. And what we see as a global industry is that we have to source from all around the world because much of the domestic production of critical minerals doesn't really exist here in the United States anymore. A number of years ago, AIA identified 12 different critical minerals that were critical to aerospace and defense. And I'm happy to talk about a number of those as we go through the conversation today. But what we called for in that original paper was that we needed to onshore as much as we could domestic production of critical minerals to limit our exposure to adversarial sources. For those that might use the export control systems of their countries to limit our access to critical minerals to maintain not only defense, but also commercial aviation. So it certainly is a big thing for our industry. It is something that is top of mind for our companies, especially as they source globally for parts and components needed for a global industry.
Right. So great to just dive into what are those top minerals that you're seeing that are most important for the U.S. aerospace and defense industry?
So number one, I think for us is going to be titanium. There is not a element of titanium that's not used on anything that flies, floats, or rolls. So we use it in aerospace, we use it in ships, and we also use it in ground vehicles. Unfortunately, the aerospace and defense industry only accounts for 4% of the titanium market around the world. And we see that titanium really becomes a source material critical to wings, to fasteners, to we call them aerostructures, we call them airfoils. You usually refer to them as propellers inside an engine. It is an essential element. So titanium is one of those real critical elements. Now, there is a 15% duty on titanium right now, even though there is no domestic source in the United States for titanium. So one of the things we've called for is to eliminate the 15% duty on titanium and to continue to find domestic sources here in the United States. I should also point out that all of the titanium producers here in the United States, they are all fully employed. There is no excess capacity for them. And so we need to have an expansion of titanium production here in the United States, but that can take at least 5 years to develop a factory for titanium. So again, one of those real critical elements that we need in aerospace and defense. Another real critical element is gallium and germanium. It's used in a variety of different uses, whether it's night vision or whether it's electro-optical. So we use that in a variety of different areas. Gallium and germanium is controlled mostly by the Chinese. There are certainly opportunities to develop here in the United States, not only original gallium and germanium, but also recycled gallium and germanium. So real opportunities there for the United States. We know that our friends at the Defense Department have looked at these particular elements because they understand the critical nature, especially again in electro-optical, think night vision as an example. And it's just an opportunity for us to limit our exposure to adversarial sources overseas.
Thank you for that rundown. You gave quite a few concrete examples that sort of demystifies why this is such an important subject. And we've referred to this in this conversation, but China's dominance of the sector is why we're talking about it. So can you say a few words about basically how much Beijing actually controls critical mineral supplies?
So if you go look at the U.S. Geological Survey's assessment of how much the U.S. is reliant on China for critical minerals, depending on the mineral, it can be between 25% and 100%. And obviously, that's been a strategy over the last number of years in order to control those critical mineral supply chains. But I would also point out that it's not necessarily an American problem. It's a problem for aerospace and defense companies around the world in every country. They are, as an industry, we have critical minerals exposure to many countries around the world that may not necessarily be in our best interests. It's because, frankly, they won the geology lottery. Those minerals exist in some of those countries, and they're willing to extract those from the ground and process them in those countries. But again, it's not just an American problem; it's also a European problem, and it's also a problem for major manufacturers in Asia. So even though we think about it from an American perspective, and we certainly should do that as U.S. persons, it is something that impacts the global industry, regardless of the color of our passports or what flag we have on the front of our houses.
The future of national security is here. Introducing the Cipher Brief's NatSec Edge Conference, June 5th through 6th, 2025 in Austin, Texas. Join leaders from intelligence, defense, private industry, and investment as they explore the innovations shaping tomorrow's world. Gain critical insights, connect with top minds, and shape the future of security in an interconnected world. Don't just witness the future, be a part of it. Secure your spot now at natsekedge.com.
So China has leveraged its control of this industry and the economic competition with the US. Can you talk about, some of these minerals are already subject to export controls and those types of measures by China. Can you talk a bit about if those measures, intensify, escalate, and we lose that kind of access? Can you talk about some of the ramifications in our military and national security supply chains? Will systems and components that depend on these things, will they be delayed? Will they be more expensive? Will we just straight up not be able to produce them?
So the good news about the aerospace and defense industry is it's a long lead sector industry, which means our companies buy these things in bulk for long periods of time because they want to make sure that they have access over the course of the manufacturing life cycle. So for some of these minerals and materials, a lot of that is already present here in the United States. And so we're continuing to buy that up as much as we can because our manufacturers know that they're going to have to use that in their manufacturing process for many years to come. Now, the piece that becomes very important for us is that this is where it becomes very important for stable budgets and consistent funding from the United States government, especially for national security purposes, because we want to make sure that funding remains available, that we limit our use of continuing resolutions, so companies have certainty that when they go out to the critical minerals market and they buy these, not necessarily from an adversarial source, but from another source, a second source that they have identified, that they know that the contract that will be necessary to use that mineral or material is going to be signed, and they're going to be able to manufacture with the government receiving that equipment that the mineral is used in. So we're going to want to make sure that we continue to stockpile as much as we can. We buy in advance as much as we can. Many of our companies sign long-term contracts to be able to have access to those minerals and materials. But the other piece to it is for the U.S. government to continue to provide stable budgets, continue to avoid continuing resolutions, and give us a certain operating environment where companies know that they're going to be able to deliver the equipment that's being called for by the U.S. Defense Department and used by U.S. warfighters.
Right. So you're jumping ahead a bit to my final question about sort of solutions, how we can mitigate this problem. I just first want to point out, and you alluded to this earlier as well, allied countries who are similarly endowed geologically, how well can we turn to them for alternative supplies?
So it depends on what the mineral or material is in those particular countries. I know that there's an active conversation right now, both in the previous administration and in the current administration, about U.S. access to those minerals or materials. It is top of mind for all governments right now to be able to have access for those minerals and materials because we recognize that it's a critical part of the U.S. supply chain. And those individual conversations that our government is having with countries around the world is something that we applaud. We need to have those conversations. We need to have access to critical minerals. Here's a good example, right? We do a lot of work with Australia. Australia has a plethora of opportunities for extraction, and they want to make sure that they are available. Those minerals are available to the world from Australia. We support that type of activity. We also support being able to process that material in non-adversarial countries. That's why security of supply chain, security of shipping lanes from that part of the world remain very important to the United States because, unfortunately, Australia is a very long way away. So even though we pull things out of the ground in Australia, at some point you have to get it into a processing facility and into manufacturing that's either in Australia or potentially in the United States. And so we're going to want to make sure that the security of the sea lanes remains the case going forward when we start to pull things out. But there are some countries right now very much want to have an extraction industry expanded because they want to provide the United States with the critical minerals necessary for U.S. workers.
Right. And then coming back home, and you've already mentioned things like the government helping provide, certainty and support. What other kinds of things are you going to be looking for, next few months, few years, that to really tackle this issue?
So one of the things that we've really focused on at AIA is permitting reform. We believe that we need to have permitting reform in the United States to be able to get access to the critical minerals that we have in our country. We also support the need for additional processing here domestically in the United States. Those are things from the aerospace and defense industry that we typically have not commented on. But it's such a critical element to our national security and our domestic supply chains that having domestic supplies of minerals and materials, being able to mine those here, being able to process those here, is really critical. And permitting reform is really the first step to get through the bureaucracy, to get things licensed, and to be able to access these minerals that we are so lucky to have domestically.
Right. You've given us a few marching orders, very specific marching orders, which we appreciate.
The devil is in the details, Ethan, especially on critical minerals and materials.
Right. Thank you for demystifying the problem a bit and giving us a path forward. Dak Hardwick, Vice President for International Affairs, the Aerospace Industries Association. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thank you, Ethan.